Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. My name is Rainer and this is Rainier Books. It's Wednesday today, December 7, and there are no football aka soccer games being played in Qatar. So the World Championships will go on with the quarterfinals on Friday with some games. And it's time for me to give you a list of 10 football aka soccer books that I would advise you to read that give you something about this beautiful game, as they call it in England at least. I have 10 books here for you, so let's get started. There are not so many novels, not so many literary works about football. There are actually in other languages, but then they're not translated into English, so I decided to choose 10 books that are available or should be available in English, either in your local bookshop, either on the internet, or either in a used bookshop somewhere around the corner. So, hopefully. The first one is Fever Pitch by Nick Hornby, which is a book, an English writer, Nick Hornby. He's very famous, and Fever Pitch is one of maybe the best sold book ever about football. In this book, Nick Hornby is telling the story in 1992. It was published in 1992, 30 years ago. And Hornby is sort of telling the story of his personal relationship to the world famous football club of Arsenal, London, the Gunners, and his relationship, how he grew up, how he experienced games as a child, how he experienced game as a young teenager, and then as an adult. And he sort of connects the dots by reporting about games that sort of have made a big impact on him and on Arsenal fans all over the world, and especially, of course, in England. It was published in 1992, and Penguin Modern Classics took it up in 2012 in their beautiful edition. The second book is this is actually literary work, but it is about a real person. This is about the very famous English football manager Brian Clough. I sort of knew about Brian Clough. I heard about him in the 1970s when he coached, in the end of the 1970s when he coached Nottingham Forest, and he led Nottingham Forest not only to win the Premier League in England, but also to win the European Cup of Champions, as it was called then, the predecessor of the Champions League. And Brian Clough, in the beginning of the 1970s, he coached Leeds United, and apparently this was a very special period, which was very difficult for him because his predecessor was one of his greatest enemies, and then he took over the club. And this book is told, it's written by David Peace. This book is told in an inner monologue of of Brian Clough, thinking about these 42 days, these 45 days, I think that he was only 45 days in Leeds United as the team manager. And this novel is called The Damned United by David Peace, published in 2007, about Brian Clough, who lived from 1935 to 2004. If you look at football games, or aka soccer, because in the United States it's called soccer for some strange reason, probably because you already have a sport called football, but then you have soccer as well. And they always say soccer is not that popular in the United States, but when I came to Portland, Oregon, 4 years ago, and rented an apartment there, an Airbnb, in the backyard of a beautiful house. It was a beautiful, beautiful cottage, eco cottage that we had there, that sort of created the energy that it needed by itself. Amazing place. I would love to go there again. And the amazing lady who rented out this house to us, this cottage, she said that she would be watching all the games of the World Cup that was played in Russia at the time on television in downtown Portland in the middle of the night almost. So it is popular, but not that popular, but it's growing in popularity. That much have I learned. But when you watch these games, you might think, oh, what kind of tactic are they playing? Are you just watching, or are you an expert on tactics? I am still learning a lot about tactics and strategic way of playing football. You have all those cards and maps that they show to the players that are subbed in. They have this, they show it to players and tell them, oh, you move there, and then you see that only on television, how they explain to players what their role will be when they're subbed in. If you want to learn about football tactics, here's the book that you have to read. It's called Inverting the Pyramid, The History of Football Tactics by Jonathan Wilson. Now, Jonathan Wilson is a British journalist. He's only like 45, 46 years old at the time now, and he has written about 10 or 12 books about football, about personalities. I think he also wrote a book about Brian Clough, but this book about the tactics of football is really a bestseller that is coming again and again and again. He explains how the game has developed its tactical phase from pure anarchy in the beginning, when everybody just sort of played what they wanted on the field, to the Dutch total football, as it was called in Dutch, to modern coaches like Pep Guardiola of Spain, who's now coaching Manchester City, and the German Jurgen Klopp, who's now the coach of the Liverpool FC. It's a funny book, but also very well informed, and Wilson teaches you how the game works, and, well, you can read a football game, a soccer game, much better after this. Then it has to get sad. It always has to get sad at some point, right? Because life's not always a dance on roses, as we say in German. The next book is a very sad one, but a very important book too. This is called A Life Too Short, The Tragedy of Robert Enke by Ronald Reng, published in 2011. I remember this story very well. On November 10, 2009, I was on a business trip in Munich, in Germany, at the head office of my employer. And when I came to the hotel and switched on the television and watched the news, I saw suddenly that the German national team goalkeeper, Robert Enke, had died. He had tragically died in a train accident. The day after, it was clear, and it was also communicated, that Robert Enke had committed suicide. Enke left a wife and a little daughter, and he committed suicide, and his wife, his widow, then has all the years tried to sort of raise awareness for depression and suicide, and she has talked very openly about it. And this book is very important because it shows how an immensely talented young sportsman from Germany, Robert Enke, who was the keeper not only first of Hannover 96 in the German Bundesliga, but later also of Benfica, Lisbon, and then of Barcelona, how this guy sort of broke down under the pressure that can be built up for elite sportsmen in this sport. So this book is about the story of Robert Enke and about why he lived such a short life. Even the next person is dead that this book is about. It's a autobiography. It's a biography about, in my eyes, the greatest football player of all times, the greatest male football player of all times. And this was published in 2018 in English after his death in 2016. He lived from 1947 to 2016. This book is called My Turn, A Life of Total Football by Johan Cruyff. No other player has influenced the beautiful game as much as the Dutch football player Johan Cruyff. As a player, he was one of the very best, with extraordinary moves, extraordinary skills, great talent, and immense leadership on the field. I remember him very well when I was 11 years old in the World Cup final of 1974, when Germany played Holland in the final in Munich. I was watching on television, 11 years old. My heart was beating fast for the German team, of course, and the Dutch team was so much better than the German team. We had a great goalkeeper in Sepp Maier who saved us. And we had the opponents, they had this guy, the sort of director of everything, Johan Cruyff, and elegance, intelligence, everything. But not only as a player he was very influential, he was even more influential as a coach later on, because he created the vision of total football, the total football that Holland played. And he also imprinted his idea, his philosophy of football on the FC Barcelona, for which he played for many years and which he coached also. And even today there are still so many, this legacy is still there in offensive, in attacking football, Johan Cruyff. This book shows, of course, he tells the story himself of his life, how he played and how he played for Ajax Amsterdam, how he made Ajax Amsterdam the best football club in Europe in the early 1970s, and then how he coached FC Barcelona later on. An incredible person, respected not only by his fans, but only his friends and opponents, and maybe the person who had the greatest single influence on how the game of football developed. This book tells his story. Then we switch to women's soccer, to women's football, and the next book is really an amazing collection of essays or articles of an American journalist, Gwendolyn Oxenhamn, who herself has played football, aka soccer. Sorry to say that all the time. It's called Under the Lights and in the Dark, Untold Stories of Women's Soccer by Gwendolyn Oxenhamn, published in 2017. This is about football, women's football all over the world. It starts with an amazing article I didn't know anything about almost a underground New York football league that apparently existed in the 90s or in the 00s, in the 2000s, where Ali Long, who was later an American international player, has played and grew strong and stronger, where she played with men and where she sort of played 2, 3, 4 games per night, because these games were played at night in some strange and obscure places, under the lights and in the dark. But this is also about players who play as professionals in Russia with incredible coaches who are screaming and yelling all the time. This is also about the Portland Thorns, the great team from the City of Roses in Portland, which has the absolute greatest audience in the world for women's football still. I was there once, 4 years ago almost. Yeah, 4 years ago. I saw the Portland Thorns play the Utah Royals at Providence Park in central Portland. And it was such an atmosphere with 20,000 people that give you goosebumps all the time. Well, this book is very, very readable and very beautiful. It's also about Nadia Nadim, I see. I didn't remember that. Nadia Nadim, a Danish international who flew with her mother and her sister as a young child from Afghanistan. They fled over the mountains to Europe, to Denmark, where Nadia became a Danish international player. And she also played for Portland later on, but that's another story. The next book is also about women's soccer, women's football, about one of the most fascinating characters that I know in the sport. It's maybe about the best goalkeeper ever in women's football, although German Nadine Angerer Heinatze is also a legend, but she is, for me, in my eyes, the greatest ever. And this is Solo, a memoir of hope by Hope Solo and Anne Killian. Maybe the best female goalkeeper of all time tells a story. It is a turbulent and sad, but also hopeful story of a girl and young woman who grew up in very difficult family relationships with a homeless father and a family that always struggled economically, but also with violence. This an incredible description how violent the relationship between Hope and her brother has been. After this book was published, so much more has happened in Hope Solo's life that a second volume would almost be due. It's a controversial but nonetheless fascinating personality. The next book is absolutely necessary. When you speak about football, you have to speak about Brazil. And this is called Futebol, the Brazilian Way of Life by Alex Bellis, published in 2002. The Brazilian football team is one of the modern wonders of the world. Traveling extensively from the coastal cities of Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo to the Amazon jungle, Bellows shows how Brazil changed football and how football shaped Brazil. The 5 times world champion, also still in the tournament, and one of the favorites to win maybe a 6th title in Qatar. Yeah, and apropos Qatar, let's start with the first of 2 books about the negative side of the sports. The first one is called The Dirty Game, Uncovering the Scandal at FIFA by Andrew Jennings. In the dirty game, a BBC Panorama reporter Andrew Jennings, who has been heralded around the world for his decade-long pursuit of the story, uncovers the eye-watering level of fraud and criminal activity at the heart of FIFA, which has been described as the biggest sporting scandal of the century. From blatter to blazer, from bribery to embezzlement, Jennings reveals the key protagonists, crimes, and evidence he handed to the FBI, which led to the arrest of FIFA executive and the resignation of Sepp Blatter. Written in a gripping narrative and based on years of research and never before seen documents, this is the definite portrait of the downfall of FIFA and the man who stole football. Yeah, and that's another thing about football, where I watched, I think 2 weeks ago, the wonderful John Oliver had a show on FIFA in his Late Show Tonight. I think it was called Late Show Tonight. Yeah. And he was explaining to those Americans who didn't know anything about football or soccer or FIFA what the FIFA is. And I think he said almost that FIFA, if you don't know what FIFA is like a cartel-like organization that is responsible for a lot of crimes and briberies and stuff like that, and an organization that from time to time organizes football games. So the World Championships, if you don't know that, the World Championships of the last at least 20, 30 years, if not longer, have almost always been sold to the highest bidder, to the country who had the most money paid under the table to FIFA executives. Because this is democracy, right? FIFA is an organization in Switzerland, built in Switzerland, which is the World Association of Football, under which the continental associations are lying. And FIFA has 210 members, I think, and each country, of course, it's democracy, right, has one voice, one vote. So if they vote for the next hosting country, for example, every country has one vote. If it's the United States, or if it's Liechtenstein or Andorra, or if it's any country. And some countries, and most of the countries, are not democracies. And a lot of countries are corrupt. And in a lot of countries, you can buy votes. And that's apparently what even Germany has done in 2006. We know today that the Germans bought the World Cup to Germany. And we know that Qatar bought the World Cup. No, bought the World Cup to Qatar. And there's a book about this, which is called The Ugly Game. Not Dirty Game, but The Ugly Game. The Qatari Plot to Buy the World Cup by Heidi Blake and Jonathan Calvert. And I assure you, there will be more books written about this topic very soon. Published in 2015, this one here. When the tiny desert state of Qatar won the rights to host the 2022 World Cup, the news was greeted with shock and disbelief. How had a country with almost no football infrastructure or tradition, a high terror risk, and searing summer temperatures of 50 degrees centigrade, which is more than 120 Fahrenheit, beaten more established countries with stronger bids? The story behind the Qatari success soon developed into one of the greatest sporting scandals of our time. Allegations of corruption were soon flying, and when the Sunday Times Inside Team received a cache of hundreds of millions of documents from a whistleblower, the contents of the FIFA files became a global sensation, unearthing the corruption that lay at the heart of the bidding process. Now in this remarkable book by the Sunday Times journalists at the heart of the investigation, Heidi Blake and Jonathan Calvert, comes the most comprehensive account yet of what happened and who was involved. Above all, it explains why, despite all the evidence, FIFA continues to support Qatar, even to the extent of publishing an edited and abbreviated report into the process that was immediately denounced by its original author. So The Ugly Game is one of the books that you could read about this huge scandal that the World Cup has ended up in Qatar. It's incredible. I mean, they wanted to play in the summer with temperatures of 50 degrees Celsius, and then the European Federation started, well, we maybe have to think about really having the World Cup in Qatar, and then FIFA and Qatar tried everything to convince the European federations, who were critical at the time, to agree. And then a bunch of very influential European association heads were invited to Qatar in 2012 or 2013 to look at the facilities, to get to know the plan for the World Cup. And then finally they decided to play in the winter, which was a compromise. And German Karl-Heinz Rummenigge from FC Bayern Munich, I think he was the president of this club, he went to Qatar. He came back to Munich in 2013, I guess, and at the customs in Germany, it was discovered that he had 2 Rolex watches in his baggage that he hadn't declared for, and he got actually a pretty high fine by the German authorities for this. So that was, but he said he didn't want to tell anyone who had given him these 2 Rolex watches. He said they were a present. I met a friend in Qatar, and he gave me this little present to me and my wife. If you have seen Gianni Infantino, the president of FIFA now in Qatar, in his unforgettable press conference, where he said, because there's also talk about 6,500 migrant workers who died building the 8 arenas over the years. There's also a lot of talk about Qatar having never ever allowed homosexuality, and was strictly against any kind of sexuality. And Budweiser, the beer sponsor, who's one of the major sponsors of the World Cup, who was told only 48 hours before the World Cup began that no, we're going to have no beer at any stadium, and for being one of the main sponsors and not able to present their product in Qatar. And if you watched Infantino's press conference, he said things like, "Today, I feel Arab. Today, I feel gay. Today, I feel a migrant worker." And it was so incredibly and so not funny, but really ridiculous, and also very inappropriate towards all the migrant workers who died, towards all the migrant workers in horrible conditions, towards all the gay people who are more or less banned from Qatar to show who they really are. I mean, people wanted to enter the stadiums with rainbow t-shirts or rainbow caps, and they were not allowed to wear these stuff, things like that. I could go on and on and on. 10 books about football, that was it, right? So stop, Reiner, stop this video, and I'll see you very soon in the next one. Goodbye.